My dad grew up in Alden, New York, which is outside of Buffalo. He was born in Cheektowaga Hospital. It wasn't a stable, income house. He was the firstborn of a set of twins, so it was him, Bruce Allen Downey Jr., his sister Regina, and then following them in the subsequent years was his sister Michelle and Michael. They all had colorful nicknames. His dad went by the nickname Bubsy, Bruce Allen Downey. Bad. My name's Cameron Downey. I'm born and raised in Tully, New York. He said when he named me, he said the Bruce stops here. Maybe the bad ends there. The first time I ever smoked weed, it was at a ski mountain in my hometown, Song Mountain, and it was like pretty common for people to just smoke on the mountain, stuff like that. We went out to the parking lot to go get high in this dude's car, and we started smoking this joint. I'm there with like one of my childhood best friends, and this guy, we had known him, he went to school, he was like a few grades older than us. A lot of people say like the first time they smoke weed, they don't get high. I think this weed was laced with something because I was fucked up for like 2 days. It was okay to be new to something, and it was encouraging. Like, people talk about peer pressure feeling negative. It almost feels like sometimes you're being brought into something, and you feel more welcome when you do that kind of thing. And growing up in an uneven playing field, like your family fights, your dad's an alcoholic, where you don't feel like you belong or you don't feel as loved, and it's easy to feel like that in your early teens, and to kind of like fixate on that. Growing up in upstate New York, you see a lot of like what once was. It's called the Rust Belt, and I think it's very apt. It's not just because we use road salt and stuff like that, it's because all the industry is left. There's few jobs, it's all service-based economy. It's always like a very sleepy town. Like, there's not a lot going on anymore. There used to be a lot of jobs at all the ski resorts in town. There was like a gravel yard. It's a very agriculturally based like community. It's a small enough community where you do get to know what everyone does, but also like, that there's a lot of family problems in small places like that. You saw the effects of it. You knew the kids that like had parents that drank a lot. There was such a taboo around it. Like, once you see how far it can go and you start to tiptoe into it, you can really start to see like, that is a fucking crazy slope that you're about to go down. It's kind of like skiing. It's like, you get up the mountain, you work up this like courage to, use for the first time, and then all of a sudden you're staring down the barrel of like, oh my God, this can consume people's lives.
I grew up in a small town north of here, just south of Syracuse, called Tully, New York. It's a very small town. I don't really know the population, but it's very quaint. Everybody knows each other. Beautiful ski resorts, lots and lots of lakes, lots of activities you can do around there. I'm Tracy Lisi. I started out as a surgical technologist and had a passion for fire and EMS, as I was born and raised in that. I don't think there is enough education in, let's say, your EMT classes or your fire classes. There isn't any mental health training in either one of them. I've sat on both sides of it. There's always somebody saying, hey, if you have a bad call, make sure you reach out. It's more of an informal discussion, but there's no real direction of, hey, I have a bad call, this is what I can do.
This intergenerational trauma is the Downey family curse, this recurring theme of drinking, of escaping, of never taking accountability. You may never take direct accountability for your actions, but to my dad, he always said, actions speak louder than words. My dad remembers like eating marshmallows because it was something that had a high caloric, count, so that he wouldn't starve and die. He remembers just, dirt poor shit like that. A generally rough childhood, He doesn't remember meeting anyone on his dad's side of the family. His dad was just, in and out. I can't really attest to a lot of the stuff that, went on besides the abuse, because that's what my dad, really tried to tell me about, to try to get me to understand him as a person. And I think this was where a lot of, his guilt and him as a person really formed. No shit, like it happens from when you're a kid, but this stuff stuck with him for pretty much the rest of his life.
When we talk about childhood trauma, what we know is that those experiences get encoded deep into the person's psyche. The human brain is not fully developed till it's 25 years old. So when a child is very young, their brain is very plastic or changeable. It's easy to make deep grooves, if you will, in that brain of experience. So trauma gets encoded deep in the psyche early on for childhood experiences, and we may not even realize we are reliving those experiences over and over again. They may not show up as PTSD symptoms. My name is Meg Peck. I'm a licensed mental health counselor here in Ithaca, New York. I had gotten sober when I was 30, so I had many years of recovery under my belt, and so then I became a clinical mental health counselor.
I remember sitting on the porch with him in my teens, and my dad would turn out his palms and he would show spots up and down his forearms. He took his shirt off one time and showed me burn marks all up and down his back, because every time he misbehaved, his dad would put out cigarettes and cigars on his back or his arms, use him as a human ashtray. Bubsy used to steal from his kids money. He took things that they valued and sold them so that he could go buy drinks. And because of this, the whole childhood, he was a rebel. He would do anything to get away from home. Him and all his friends, he would just wreak havoc, just to have a form of escaping. And he was known to be a troublemaker. His whole tribe kind of was, and in a way, like it was a way of him escaping. I think even back then, to act out, to do something stupid. He did not know what he wanted to do with his life. He was told from a very young age that he would never do shit and he would never be shit. He went to community college to do architecture. He left his degree early because he got a job as a contractor. And the work wasn't really steady, so he decided that it would be best for him to do a career change very early in his life. He started his first job as a registered nurse in a cardiological clinic where they were installing pacemakers, all this other kind of stuff.
I think that the transition from being a student to entering the workforce, or just kind of real life in general, can be kind of jarring for a lot of people. But I think that's really important for students, especially that are aspiring to have careers in medicine or hospital administration or anywhere where they're going to be in touch on a day-to-day basis with stakeholders in the community or the patient population, to step out of that academic setting and interact with people that are in the community. My name's Alina. I am from South Carolina originally, went to school in Texas, and then I've lived in this kind of central New York area for the last almost 5 years now.
The two head doctors of that specific clinic both got pregnant pretty much simultaneously. And there was a window where, he was working very hard there, and while his doctors weren't around, and that earned him a lot of attention. He was doing really good work. The doctors really appreciated him, and that started him really realizing he could make something with this. He went on after that, I think, to work for a private company after he bounced around a few more clinics and hospitals, but I think that job taxed him in a lot of ways that he never really talked about. He didn't talk about what he did at work, he just talked about being good at what he did. And I think that that speaks to something kind of deep on a human level.
It's a two-way street though, because I think a lot of the times the people that work in healthcare kind of like that urgency. They like that sense of feeling important and rushed, and kind of, you never know what's going to happen. Anything that you can do or help with, can you learn it? Can you do it? Perfect. Then you're going to do it. Not taking a lunch break is almost a badge of honor. But on the back end of it, there's not really that type of like solace or care for people who are going through this on a day-to-day basis. And it definitely took a toll on a lot of people.
With how fucked up his life was, he wanted to help other people who were having terrible situations and that were, in distress. I think it was a way for him to retroactively try to help himself. Not to say that it was like all for like, malintent. I think he had good intentions with it, but I think ultimately like there's a calling that you have to do it, and I think that calling is a self-gratifying thing once you start doing it. So him and my mom, after they had been moving around for a while, they ended up in Allentown, PA, and that's when they had my sister. They were just out there by themselves. No family followed them. They were setting up for themselves.
My dad was always this person I could do anything with, the person I could get away with anything, and I could have fun.
He felt the pressure of, I have a family now. I want to provide the best that I can. But at the same time, like, you're in your early, to late 20s. Like, how do you know what's going on? Like, you have a kid, you're working your job, but like, there's still more that you want.
I remember my dad as more of a figure who I would occasionally see on like good days, weekends. He was always trying to keep himself busy. And I can kind of, now as an adult, see the stress that was on my dad for that. That was entirely new for him, having this child by himself, and had no idea what to do.
That raised the stakes of, having to grow up and make money. So I think that changed the way he was going to measure his materialistic gain. I think it was going to put a lot of things into overdrive, where he was just going to keep going and going and going,
It's the whole work hard, play hard mentality when you're dealing with these high profession fields. You go out and you in your mind, in the professional's mind, you work 55 hours a week, you make a ton of money. So what if you want to spend it on cocaine that weekend, right? My name is Derek English. I'm currently the executive director at the Ithaca Health Alliance here in Ithaca, New York. I think a lot of people in those fields don't ever think it'll happen to them because of their degrees or their jobs or their job titles. Burnout is a real thing, and access is a real thing, and curiosity is a real thing, and genetics play a huge part in this. And I think oftentimes people need a release.
He didn't want to bring that shit home. He didn't like being like, on anything around us. I'd say, working as hard as he did, he just kept wanting more and more money, working harder and harder, and it became less about helping people, I think.
The more stressed you are, I think the more you have to do to relieve that stress. And I think a lot of people like to take shortcuts. Yeah, sure, you can go to therapy and do yoga and meditation and take 4 hours to recenter. We can go to the bar and have a couple shots in 15 minutes. I think when you're dealing with people who are strapped for time, who work 60 hours a week, they're going to take that shorter way out. And physiologically, they might not ever become addicted, but there are some people with that gene who will become hopelessly addicted sometimes.
So, working at a hospital, being able to administer, medicines to people, Bruce kind of saw this as a way to get a leg up. If he can get these drugs and help other people escape, he was going to do it.
Seeing the two different people in my dad, it always made me feel like he was a bomb. That classic reference of, this is a bomb that I have to defuse. Am I going to cut the proper wire?
I know that he was stealing from the hospitals, using for himself in some part, but also selling to some other people. And when you're doing that at a medical, institution, it's gonna, things are gonna add up eventually.
I see that as my dad realizing he knew how to beat the game. He could beat the game. He just knew he needed to know how to play it better. In reality, it started, in my mind, testing the waters a bit more. Seeing where the leaks were.
My dad and my mom were sitting in their apartment, my sister's there, and there's a knock on the door, and it's some guys that say, "We know what you're doing, you need to stop." And my dad was really confused. That's the FBI knocking on your door telling you to fucking stop. And they said, "We know what you're doing, we know you're selling, you need to stop."